Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to start with this new topic, cephalosporins. As part of the earlier discussion of the beta-lactam antibiotics, we have already discussed penicillin and the semi-synthetic penicillins. Now these cephalosporins, they are the second group of the beta-lactam antibiotics, and today we are going to discuss about the cephalosporins. So the objectives of today's class, that is beta-lactam antibiotics, cephalosporins, I'm going to discuss the introduction, the historical background, chemistry, mechanism of action, the bacterial resistance, classification of the cephalosporins, and certain special features about the first generation, second generation, and the third generation of cephalosporins, followed by the summary. Now coming to the introduction, as I told you, the cephalosporins, they are the second major group of the beta-lactam broad spectrum antibiotics. These are penicillinase resistant antibiotics, and they are derived from the cephalosporin C, which is obtained from the fungus, that is Cephalosporium. Now, by doing a chemical modification of the basic structure of the cephalosporin, we are able to get a large number of semi-synthetic antibiotics, and these large number of semi-synthetic antibiotics are further divided into the first, second, third, fourth, and the fifth generation of the cephalosporins. So today we'll have a discussion of the first three generation of the cephalosporins, and in the next lecture we will discuss the fourth and the fifth generation of the cephalosporins in detail. So these cephalosporins, if you see, they are beta-lactam antibiotics, meaning thereby that they are closely related to the penicillins. In both the chemical structure will have the beta-lactam ring, so they will be similar to the penicillin, and the mechanism of action of these cephalosporin group of drugs is also closely related to the penicillin. And both these drugs, they are used to treat the bacterial infections. Now, in the last class, we discussed about the penicillin, and you have an idea that following certain drawbacks of penicillin, the semi-synthetic penicillins, they came up, and in 1960, you can remember, and penicillin came up around 1941. So there were certain drawbacks with penicillin, like it is acid labile, then their oral absorption is also poor. Also, it has a narrow antibacterial spectrum, and it is susceptible to the beta-lactamases. And also the tendency to cause the hypersensitivity reaction. So because of all these problems with the penicillin, and then we have the semi-synthetic penicillin to overcome some of these problems. Now the advantages of cephalosporin over the penicillin is it is having an increased acid stability. So many of the oral drugs, they are effective. They are all having better absorption. Some of them are having good tissue penetration. They also have a broad antibacterial spectrum, and they are active against the resistant microorganisms, because as you know, worldwide the resistant microorganisms, they're creating all sorts of problems. We are not able to treat them. Many of the antibiotics which were earlier effective, now they are becoming ineffective. So all these issues are taken care of by the cephalosporins. Also, they have the decreased allergenicity, that is, they have decreased propensity to cause the allergic reactions, and they have a good tolerability, increased tolerance as compared to the penicillin. So because of all these advantages of increased acid stability, better absorption, broad spectrum and antibacterial activity, active against resistant organisms, and decreased hypersensitivity and increased safety profile of the cephalosporin, so they are having an advantage over the penicillin, and that is why we want to know about the cephalosporins. So why there is the need for the cephalosporins? The need for the cephalosporins is because of its broad spectrum of activity. Number of organisms, gram positive, gram negative, pseudomonas, and many of the resistant organisms are also taken care of by the cephalosporins. So therefore, there is a need for understanding the cephalosporins because of their broad spectrum of activity. Also, they have a stability to the beta-lactamases. In the last class, you are very well acquainted how penicillin is becoming ineffective because the organisms are producing the beta-lactamases, isn't it? So because they produce beta-lactamases, so the beta-lactam antibiotics, they are becoming ineffective. So if the drug is stable to the beta-lactamases, so the breakdown of the beta-lactam ring does not take place and the drug is effective for these organisms. And these organisms which are producing the beta-lactamases, they are also responsible for the resistance. So that resistant microorganisms are also taken care of by the cephalosporins. Also, the cephalosporins, we have wide number of drugs, large number of semi-synthetic drugs are there, and we have a broad choice regarding the oral preparations and the parenteral preparations. When there are common infections, we can treat it by the oral preparation. If there are serious infections, we can give the parenteral preparation. So they are widely accepted drugs and they are used for treating the day-to-day. That is, most of the common infections are also taken care of, as well as certain serious infections are also taken care of. So much so that even the hospital-acquired pneumonia, community-acquired pneumonia, and so all these and serious infection caused by pseudomonas and some resistant infection, they are also taken care of by the parenteral preparations. And it also has a high safety profile. So because of all these properties of the cephalosporins, their broad spectrum of activity, their stability to the beta-lactamases, and therefore they are effective against resistant microorganisms. Then oral availability of a large number of oral and parenteral preparations with wide antibacterial spectrum, meaning thereby that only a single cephalosporin would not be effective against all the organisms. So you have a choice of the cephalosporin accordingly based on the antibacterial spectrum. So you can choose it for the particular type of the infection. And it is a widely accepted drug. It is treating most of the common infection as well as the serious infection and having a better safety profile. Now that we have seen the introduction about the cephalosporins, we would like to see the historical background about the cephalosporins. Now the history of the discovery of cephalosporin, it is as fascinating as the discovery of the penicillin. You know very well how the penicillin was discovered by Alexander Fleming. One day he returned back from his summer vacation. He had gone to Scotland and that was his hometown. So after his summer vacation, he came back to the St. Mary's Hospital in London, and when he came back, he found that his lab was in a mess and the penicillium mold that has elaborated a certain substance which has inhibited the growth of staphylococcus on the culture plate. So he was able to give the name penicillin to that particular substance, but he was not able to isolate. Then it was Chain and Florey who carried on the work of Alexander Fleming, and after 10 years, after a decade, that is in 1939, the Chain and Florey, they were able to isolate the crude preparation of the penicillin. So you can see how dramatic the discovery of penicillin was, and both the Chain and Florey as well as Alexander Fleming, all three scientists, they were given the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1945. So you know how we discovered the penicillin and how the discovery of penicillin was a very great contribution to the mankind. And for the first time, we were having some antibiotic, and it was used for the first time in by the U.S. Army hospital, because during the Second World War, to treat the war wounds. So this is how the story of the discovery of penicillin is. Now, if you see the discovery of cephalosporin, this is also very fascinating, just like the discovery of penicillin. You can see cephalosporins, they were isolated from the Cephalosporium species, this is the fungus, and also large number of the cephalosporins, they have been prepared semi-synthetic, by doing the chemical modification. we discovered different types of cephalosporins having different antibacterial spectrum and better pharmacokinetic properties. And this way we got a large number of the cephalosporins. So the first chemical compound of the cephalosporin group, this was isolated from the fungus Cephalosporium, and the name was Cephalosporium acremonium. This is the cephalosporin producing fungus. And if you see, this was first discovered by Giuseppe Broadzu in 1948. So actually Broadzu is a professor of bacteriology, and he worked from 1945. Finally, he was able to publish many of his work around 1948, and he was able to say that this is fungus, and this we can get a number of agents from this fungus, and this could be used to treat many diseases. So in the historical background, now that we have come to Broadzu, Professor Broadzu, he is, you can see, from Sardinia in 1945. In 1940, from 1945 to 1948, he worked on this particular cephalosporium, and his work was, he did it in Sardinia, and Sardinia is a southern part of the Europe, and today it is part of the Italy. So I think one day, once after this COVID-19 pandemic gets over, maybe next year, we can all take a Air India flight and go to this particular Sardinia, because I heard this is a part of Italy and it is a summer destination. It is having beautiful beaches. So this is a beautiful country. Maybe next year we all can take a Air India flight and go there, isn't it? So if you see the Sardinia, this particular place, it was a part of Italy, and he was working there. The idea came to the minds of Broadzu that to make the culture from the sea water, which is coming at a sewage outfall. He took the area of the sewage outfall because he assumed that it might contain organisms which would be antagonists to the intestinal pathogens. So with some idea, he took this particular sea water where the sewage outfall was coming, and he made cultures of this, and he was able to isolate the fungus Cephalosporium acremonium. Now this culture, from this culture he made the crude extract, and he was, after some time, he was able to demonstrate the that it is active in humans against certain pathogens. And all these work he published in a local Sardinian journal. If it is published in a local Sardinian journal, many people who are there in the rest of the world, they are not able to come to know, because it is a local journal and it is published there. So in between, the biggest role was of Dr. Blitherbrook. This is the story which goes behind the discovery of cephalosporin, because without the contribution of Dr. Blitherbrook, we would not have known, the rest of the world would have not ever known that there is something called cephalosporin, which could be useful for a wide number of infections. It was the contribution of Dr. Blitherbrook, because what he did was he just wrote a letter. And he wrote a letter to which person? He wrote a letter to Florey. You know Chen and Florey, who got the Nobel Prize for discovering this penicillin, and along with the Alexander Fleming. So it's the same Florey, Howard Florey, and he received a letter from Blitherbrook, who was a public health officer in Sardinia. And once he received this letter, Florey came to know that there is some work can be done on this particular cephalosporium, and we can get number of antibiotics. So the same Florey, he received the culture in 1948. So you can see from 1945 to 48, it was the work of Broadzu, who actually gave us an insight that yes, there is something called this fungus, Cephalosporium acremonium, and we can get a large number of drugs which could be effective against the human pathogens. And so Florey received it in 1948. Then further work was done by Florey. As you know, Florey also worked on the penicillin. He was able to isolate the crude preparation of penicillin. So the same interest was there, and writing a letter to the right person definitely makes a difference. And you can see the same difference coming here. Florey worked on it, and in 1955, he was able to describe amazing initial findings. The cultures which were produced, they produced certain substances which were effective against the Salmonella typhi and typhoid fever. And it was in 1964 where we had cephalothin, the first agent this is the first generation cephalosporin which was discovered, and this was launched by Eli Lilly, which is the pharmaceutical company. So you can see how fascinating this discovery of cephalosporin, as well as it is like the discovery of the penicillin. So next we'll go to the chemical structure. Now, if you see the chemical structure, just like penicillin, you see the penicillin. Penicillin is the chemical relation of penicillin is there with the cephalosporin. And if you see the nucleus of the penicillin, we had the 6-amino penicillinic acid. So same thing, the cephalosporin, the nucleus of the cephalosporin is having the 7-amino cephalosporanic acid. Now this particular nucleus, you can see it is having a beta-lactam ring and a dihydrothiazide ring, and they are fused together. And in the beta-lactam ring at the position 7, you do some modification in the side chain, you are getting antibacterial spectrum which are against certain specific organisms. So you can the antibacterial spectrum can be altered by doing the side chain modification at the position 7. Now in the position 3 of the dihydrothiazine ring, if you do some modification, then you get the drugs which will affect the pharmacokinetics. So this way, by doing the modification, chemical modification, you can have different cephalosporins which are having different antibacterial spectrum and different pharmacokinetic properties. So large number of semi-synthetic compounds have been produced in this way. Now, in the same understanding about the chemical structure, in this diagram, you can see the 7-amino cephalosporanic acid. Just like in penicillin, we had the nucleus 6-amino penicillinic acid. Here you are having in cephalosporins 7-amino cephalosporanic acid. And you can see the beta-lactam ring, as well as you can see the dihydrothiazine ring, which is fused together with the beta-lactam ring. And in the side chains, you can see at the position 7, R1 and at the position 3, you have the R2. So semi-synthetic cephalosporins are prepared by attaching different chemical groups at the R1 and the R2 position. Also in this diagram, you can see that the site of cleavage by the bacterial beta-lactamases. You can see the beta-lactam ring, and here you can see the bond. This bond is broken by the bacterial beta-lactamase, and that is how the bacteria develops resistance by producing beta-lactamase or by producing the penicillinase. And so after chemistry, we will see the mechanism of action. Now in mechanism of action, they are beta-lactam antibiotics. So as I told you in the initial part of the introduction, where I told you that they are chemically structured, they are related to penicillin, as well as their mechanism of action is also related to penicillin. So in this diagram, you can see how the bacterial cell metabolism is going on at different levels. And today we are concerned with the cell wall synthesis inhibitor. So you can see the cell wall disruptors, they are the beta-lactams. And just like penicillin, cephalosporins are also cell wall synthesis inhibitors. Now in this cell wall synthesis inhibition, the most important part of the cell wall is the peptidoglycan. So the peptidoglycan is the most important component of the bacterial cell wall, and it maintains the integrity of the organism by withstanding the pressure. So there is a pressure, hydrostatic pressure, hydroosmotic pressure within. This pressure is maintained, and the peptidoglycan helps in maintaining the integrity of the cell wall, as well as it also maintains the shape of the cell. Now this peptidoglycan, it consists of N-acetyl glucosamine and N-acetyl uramic acid, which are linked by the peptide bond. So this peptidoglycan plays a very important role in terms of having the N-acetyl uramic acid and N-acetyl glucosamine, and it is linked together by the peptide bonds. And the peptidoglycan is in a dynamic state over the lifespan of the bacteria. So it's a very important part of the bacterial cell metabolism, cell wall synthesis. It plays a very important part in the synthesis of the cell wall, and there is a very important role of the transpeptidases. As I told you when I was discussing the mechanism of action of penicillin, what are these transpeptidases? These transpeptidases are actually the enzymes and the related proteins. They are clubbed together, and we don't know them in terms of penicillin binding protein. So these transpeptidases, these are the enzymes which are liberated inside in the inner membrane. They are containing these enzymes, and they are liberated. They are responsible for facilitating the cell wall synthesis. And beta-lactam antibiotics, you know, they inhibit the cell wall synthesis. So what they do is they inhibit the transpeptidases. And once they go and inhibit the transpeptidases, this cell wall synthesis is affected. The N-acetylglucosamine and N-acetylmuramic acid, they are responsible for cross-linking between the peptide chains of the neighboring strands, and these agents, they are responsible for providing the stability and rigidity to the cell wall. So you can understand how important the transpeptidases, that is the penicillin binding proteins, they are very important for the cell wall synthesis. And beta-lactam antibiotics, they will inhibit the cell wall synthesis by inhibiting the transpeptidases. So here this diagram will explain you better. Some of these penicillin binding proteins, that is transpeptidases, many of these organisms, they have several this penicillin binding proteins, and these several penicillin binding proteins, they have different affinity for different beta-lactam antibiotics. So these penicillin binding proteins, they actually determine the sensitivity pattern of the beta-lactam antibiotics. And if you see the penicillin binding protein, the cephalosporins, they also bind to the penicillin binding protein, but they bind to a penicillin binding protein which is different than that of the penicillin. So penicillin binds to a different penicillin binding protein, and cephalosporins and other beta-lactam antibiotics, they bind to different penicillin binding protein. So this explains the difference in the antibacterial spectrum. It also explains the difference in potency, and it also explains the lack of cross resistance between penicillin and cephalosporin, because cross resistance will not take place, because the penicillin binding protein to which penicillin binds, that is different from the penicillin binding protein to which the cephalosporin binds. And so you know that these penicillin binding proteins, they are having the transpeptidase activity, and this transpeptidase activity is again essential for the cell wall synthesis. And beta-lactam antibiotics, all these drugs, they inhibit the transpeptidase. So with this, we have understood the mechanism of action, that they cause the inhibition of the bacterial cell wall synthesis. So the cephalosporins, they inhibit they are cell wall synthesis inhibitors, just like the penicillin. These we have understood. Secondly, we also have understood that the transpeptidases enzyme is inhibited by the beta-lactam. So what happens? These transpeptidase enzymes, once they are inhibited, they will lead to failure of the cross-linking. You know that peptidoglycan is containing the N-acetylglucosamine and the N-acetylmuramic acid, and they are responsible for the cross-linking, and they are providing stability and rigidity to the cell wall. Now, if these transpeptidases, these enzymes which are there in the inner membrane, and these enzymes are liberated, they are facilitating the cell wall synthesis. If these enzymes are inhibited, so what finally they will do? They will cause failure of the cross-linking of the peptide chain of the strands, and it will affect the stability and rigidity of the cell wall, isn't it? So once the stability and rigidity of the cell wall is affected, so what will happen? In the presence of the beta-lactam antibiotics, the bacteria has to divide. So during the time when the bacteria has to divide, it is dividing, cell wall deficient forms, that is CWD forms are formed. Now once the cell wall deficient forms are formed, the interior of the bacteria is hyperosmotic, due to which the cell wall deficient forms, they swell up, then they burst, and the bacterial lysis takes place. So this explains the bactericidal action of the beta-lactam antibiotics. Now, with this understanding about the mechanism of action of the cephalosporins, let us see the pattern of the bacterial resistance which takes place. We have seen that with penicillin, how the penicillin is production is creating so much of problem, And because of this, we are having the resistant microorganisms coming up, and many of the resistant organisms like staphylococci, gonococci, E. coli, H. influenzae, they have become highly resistant by producing the penicillinase. So this is there for penicillin as well as for cephalosporins also. The same bacterial resistance pattern is because of these mechanisms. The bacteria is developing these mechanisms and leading to the problem of resistance. Then we have the penicillin binding proteins. Now, after the beta-lactamase production, that is inactivation of the antibiotic by the beta-lactamase, because penicillinase production is taking place by some of these organisms, and Staphylococcus is very notorious. So we have seen how the antibiotic is becoming ineffective. Earlier it was effective, now it is becoming ineffective. The another mechanism is the modification of the target penicillin binding protein. Now, you know very well about the penicillin binding protein, how it is very much, this transpeptidases, you saw how it is very much involved in the bacterial cell wall synthesis. If there is alteration, or if there is loss of the penicillin binding proteins, or there is some alteration in the affinity, so what will happen? The beta-lactam antibiotics, they will reach the target, but they will not be able to act because of the low affinity of the beta-lactam antibiotic towards the penicillin binding protein. So if there is low affinity for the drug to the penicillin binding protein, because the penicillin binding protein has undergone alteration. So because altered penicillin binding protein is there, now there will be low, the action of the drug will be less, and therefore the resistance will develop against the particular beta-lactam antibiotic. And as you know, the beta-lactam antibiotics, they play this penicillin binding protein, they play a very important role in determining the sensitivity pattern of the beta-lactam antibiotics. So very true about the penicillin binding protein is the occurrence of the MRSA, methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, is the best example of altered penicillin binding protein. Other than that, we have certain pneumococci which have become highly resistant because of the altered penicillin binding proteins, and also some enterococci also, they have altered penicillin binding protein, and therefore they have developed resistance. Then we have also seen about the porine channels, and you know that there are certain gram-negative bacteria, they have the porine channels, and these are formed by specific proteins which are located on the outer membrane. And the permeability of various beta-lactam antibiotics will depend upon the porine channels, because some of the beta-lactam antibiotics which have better permeability through the porine channels, like the ampicillin and certain other beta-lactam antibiotics, they're effective against the gram-negative organism. Also, further, there are some resistant gram-negative bacteria, and they have been found to be resistant by way of, it has been seen that there is loss of porine channels, or there is a alteration of the porine channel. Because of that, some of these highly resistant gram-negative organisms have been seen that there is some problem with the porine channels. And last but not the least, we have the antibiotic efflux. That is a mechanism also by which certain active transfer mechanism, the organism develops mechanism by which the beta-lactam antibiotic is thrown out of the cell, so it becomes ineffective. So by all these mechanisms, the bacterial resistance is seen in the beta-lactam antibiotics, that is by the penicillinase production, by alteration of the penicillin binding protein, by impaired penetration of the drug through the porine channels, and by the antibiotic efflux. So with all these understanding about the cephalosporins, we come to the classification of the cephalosporins. So earlier we had first, second, third generation, and over the years the fourth generation has also come up, and just recently the fifth generation of cephalosporin has also come up. And all these generations of cephalosporin, they have a chronology of development. That is, this division has a chronological sequence of development. So as they were developed, some of them were developed in 1960s, then 70s, then 80s, then 90s, then recently in 2000, 16. So all because there is a sequence in the chronology of development. So based on that, we try to understand the 5 generation of the cephalosporins, and this sequence is based on their antibacterial spectrum of activity. Some of them are effective more against the gram-positive, some of them are effective against the gram-negative. So the antibacterial spectrum of activity and their potency. Then these drugs, different generations have come up based on their susceptibility to the beta-lactamases. Some of them are susceptible to the beta-lactamases. Some of them are resistant to the beta-lactamases. Some of them are highly resistant to the beta-lactamases because we are facing the problem of resistance microorganisms, and these resistance is because of production of beta-lactamases, that is by penicillinase production, they are becoming resistant. So we definitely need some cephalosporin which should be resistant to the beta-lactamase. Then only it will be useful against the resistant organisms. And also some of the cephalosporins, they are having the division based on the effective pharmacokinetic properties. Some of them are effective orally, some of them are effective by parenteral injections, some of them are not metabolized, some of them are excreted in the kidneys, some of them have a short pH. So based on many pharmacokinetic properties, this broad classification of the cephalosporins. So one by one we'll see all these 5 generations. So let us see the classification of cephalosporins. Now many of the cephalosporins, the first generation, cephalothin is the first generation cephalosporin, which was discovered in 1964. But you can see in the list it is not mentioned. The reason for this is that we are getting now more effective, better effective drugs. So some of the cephalosporin, the list has been differing in many of the texts, and 2020, this is the updated list of the cephalosporins which we are using them in India. And so cephalothin was the first generation cephalosporin, and we can see the first generation cephalosporin, they were introduced in 1960s, and they're more effective. See the antibacterial spectrum, they're more effective against the gram-positive, also certain gram-negative organisms. And if you see the susceptibility of beta-lactamases, with this first generation cephalosporins, they are susceptible to the beta-lactamase. So because some of them are susceptible to the beta-lactamases, we are in need of better drugs which should be resistant to the beta-lactamases. So the second generation cephalosporins, they have come up in 1970s, and these drugs, they are resistant to some extent to the beta-lactamases, and they are more effective against the gram-negative, as you can see in the antibacterial spectrum. So this is a broad understanding that gram-negative organisms are taken care of, as well as certain gram-positive also, but more of the gram-negative organisms are taken care of by the second generation cephalosporins. Then we have the third generation cephalosporin, which came up in 1980s, and you can see the antibacterial spectrum, they are very much effective against the gram-negative organisms. Also, they are highly resistant to the beta-lactamases. So those organisms which are causing production of the beta-lactamases and producing the penicillinase and becoming very, very resistant. So those highly resistant organisms, they are also taken care of by the third generation cephalosporins. Today we are going to discuss the first, second and the third generation cephalosporin in detail, and in our next class we will discuss in detail about the fourth generation cephalosporin, that is which was introduced in 1990s. And these fourth generation cephalosporins are also very, very effective against the gram-negative organism, and they also take care of the resistant organism because they are not susceptible to the beta-lactamases. Also, to complete the list, we have the fifth generation cephalosporin, and this was introduced around 2016, and because basically we are facing the problem of the MRSA. So for MRSA, we are having drugs for treating the MRSA, like because methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. You know methicillin? That is the penicillinase resistant penicillin. Last class we spoke about the methicillin, that we are doing away with the use of methicillin. So because resistance has developed. So MRSA. Now because the Staphylococcus aureus is a gram-positive organism, and this is being taken care of right now. We are having drugs like vancomycin, linezolid, teicoplanin, which are used for MRSA. And among the cephalosporins also, we have this 5th generation cephalosporin, which has come up to address this issue of the MRSA, because worldwide we are having the problem for the MRSA, which has developed. And this 5th generation cephalosporins, they are also non-susceptible to the beta-lactamases, which are produced by resistant bacteria. So those resistant organisms which are producing the beta-lactamases, so against those also the 5th generation cephalosporin is as effective like the vancomycin, teicoplanin and linezolid, which are basically used against the MRSA. So now let us come to the drugs, because as pharmacologists we are very concerned with the drugs. So cephalothin was the first generation cephalosporin, which was introduced in 1964, and we are now using more of these 3 drugs which are there: parenteral preparation, that is cefazolin, and oral preparation, that is cephalexin and cephadroxil. Now you can see a long list of cephalosporin is there, and in the 2nd generation cephalosporin we have cefuroxil, cefuroxetin, and oral preparation we have cefaclor, cefuroxime axitin and cefprozil. Now among the students there is always a problem that we are not able to remember the cephalosporins, because it is a long list of names and many times it is difficult to remember the names. So there is a small trick you can remember. So I have made it in red color. So the 1st generation cephalosporin, you can remember it is having Fa. So you can see cefazolin, cephalexin and cephadroxil. You can remember these 3 drugs, and it is having Fa, only with the exception of cefaclor, which is a 2nd generation cephalosporin. This way you can remember. Then coming to the 3rd generation cephalosporin, I have marked in red. It will be having drugs by IME, ONE, that is IME 1 and 10. You can remember. So 3rd generation cephalosporin, parenteral preparation, we have cefotaxime, ceftriaxone, ceftriaxone, ceftazidime and cefoperazone. Then oral preparation, we are having cefixime, cefpodoxime proxetil, cefdinil, ceftibuten, ceftamide, pivoxil. So these are the 3rd generation cephalosporins, and all are containing either IME, ONE or 10. So you can remember this way. And the good students, sometimes they are asked in the grand viva. So if few names you are able to say, then it is good. 4th generation you can remember with the alphabet PI, that is cefepime and cefpirone. And the 5th generation you can remember the word RO, so ceftaroline and ceftobutane. So this way, it becomes easier, and at least 4 or 5 names you can utter during the viva. So good students, they are asked, and always also you can remember. Now in this classification of the drugs, you can see in the 3rd generation drug, you can see ceftriaxone. Now this one is one of the longest acting drugs, and this is very effective against a wide number of organisms. And ceftazidime and cefoperazone, if you see, these are the drugs more used against the Pseudomonas. So they are known as anti-pseudomonal cephalosporins. Just like we had the piperacillin and ticarcillin, remember, in the semi-synthetic penicillin, which were used against Pseudomonas. So just like that, you have the ceftazidime and cefoperazone, which are anti-pseudomonal drugs. And the oral drugs, we have cefixime, cefpodoxime, cefdinil, ceftibuten and ceftamide, pivoxil. Among these, the ester drugs, the drugs which are esters, they are, sometimes you are asked, so that is, you can see the 2nd generation, you have cefuroxime axitin, and 3rd generation, you have cefodoxime proxetil, and you have the ceftamide, pivoxil. These 3 drugs, cefuroxime axitin, cefodoxime proxetil, and ceftamide, pivoxil, these are ester prodrugs. So in this way, you can remember all these drugs. So now we'll venture into the long list of these drugs. We'll cover 10 drugs of the 3rd generation, and 5 drugs of the second generation, and 3 drugs of the first generation drug, one by one. Quickly we'll go to this. It will be, so the first generation cephalosporin, cefazolin. You can see it is more effective against the gram-positive. As I told you, the first generation cephalosporin are more effective against gram-positive and also few organisms gram-negative. Cefazolin is a parenteral preparation which is having antibacterial spectrum, which is effective against streptococci, gonococci, meningococci, H. influenzae, Clostridia, actinomyces, Moraxella catarrhalis. But you must remember that they are susceptible to the beta-lactamases, isn't it? Because the first generation ones, they are not to be used in any serious infection because they're susceptible to the beta-lactamases, so they are less active against the penicillinase producing staphylococci as well as the penicillinase producing H. influenzae. So this is the kinetics because they are given parenteral injection. It is by intramuscular or IV injections, and they have a long T-half. This drug is somewhat also disposed in the bile. So, you know, just like ampicillin, it is excreted in the bile, undergoes enterohepatic recirculation. So what happens? We are using it in the cholecystitis. So just like that, this is also a drug which is excreted in the bile. And the only indication of cefazolin is the drug of choice for surgical prophylaxis. And this drug of choice for surgical prophylaxis is because it penetrates most of the tissues. So it is used as surgical prophylaxis. Then we come to the oral drug, that is cephalexin and cefadroxil. Both cephalexin is a congener of the cefazolin, whereas cefadroxil is a congener of cephalexin. And cephalexin is also high concentration achieved in the bile, and it has a T-half of 1 hour. If you see cefadroxil, it is also a close congener of cephalexin, and it has a good tissue penetration. So also, although the T-half is less, but because it has a good tissue penetration, so it has a sustained action. And because of sustained action, you can give it as a 12-hour dosing. Now coming to the second generation cephalosporin. Now second generation cephalosporin, they have come up to overcome certain issues which were there with the first generation cephalosporin. Those issues were like they were more susceptible to the beta-lactamases, as well as they were more effective on the gram-positive. So these second generation cephalosporin, they are much effective against the gram-negative organisms. They are also resistant to the gram-negative beta-lactamases, so they can be used against resistant organisms like the penicillinase produces Neisseria gonorrhea, ampicillin resistant H. influenzae, certain gram-positive cocci, as well as certain anaerobes. So the pharmacokinetics is ceforaxime is injected intramuscularly, and it is found to have a good CSF level, but it has been superseded by the third generation cephalosporin like the ceftriaxone, and those are more preferred for the treatment of meningitis because they achieve even more higher CSF level than the second generation cephalosporin. Ceforaxime is single dose intramuscular injection is useful for gonorrhea, that is penicillinase producing Neisseria gonorrhea, as well as it is preferred for treating the community acquired pneumonia. And you know, the community acquired pneumonia, the H. influenzae is the most notorious organism, and also the Klebsiella. So these organisms are taken care of by the ceforaxime. Now, in second generation cephalosporin, other than ceforaxime, there was another drug, cefoxitin. You can see the classification. I have mentioned the cefoxitin. Now, this cefoxitin, this is not available in India, and it is not available in India, cefoxitin, and but this cefoxitin is effective against the anaerobes and against the bacteria fragilis. Ceforaxime is not effective, but cefoxitin is effective, but that is not available in India. And cefoxitin is more coming as in the name is mentioned, cephamycins. So these mycins, they are derived from actinomycins. So there's a little difference, although structurally they are related to the cephalosporin. Now we come to the oral preparations of the second generation cephalosporin, that is the ceforaxime axitin. As I told you that this is an ester of ceforaxime. So it has an incomplete oral absorption, and it activity is in vivo hydrolysis. There is a release of the cefuroxime. It acts as a prodrug, and then the release of cefuroxime takes place. This particular second generation cephalosporin, this drug also crosses the blood-brain barrier, but it is not used in meningitis because the third generation cephalosporin, they are more effective than the second generation cephalosporin. Then coming to the oral preparation, cefaclor and cefprozil. Now cefaclor also, it has a significant activity, but the limitation of the cefaclor is, although most of the second generation cephalosporins are resistant to the beta-lactamases, but cefaclor is susceptible to the beta-lactamases. So therefore, it limits the utility of the cefaclor, but although it's mentioned in the list. So then we have cefprozil. Cefprozil also is an oral preparation, second generation cephalosporin, and it has a good activity against Streptococcus pyogenes, Streptococcus pneumoniae, Staphylococcus aureus. So some of the gram-positive organisms are taken care of, as well as certain gram-negative like H. influenzae, Moraxella, and Klebsiella. The pharmacokinetics is excreted by the kidney, and the indication of the cefprozil is for certain ENT infections, for treating the bronchitis, and certain skin infections. These drugs are the oral second generation cephalosporin. Now coming to the third generation cephalosporin, as you know, the third generation cephalosporin, they are an important group which were introduced in 1980. And they are very, very effective against the gram-negative Enterobacteriaceae, as well as some of them are very effective against Pseudomonas. And they are also highly resistant to the beta-lactamases. So many resistant organisms will be taken care of by the third generation cephalosporin, and therefore a wide use of this class of drugs is there, and these are an important class of drugs. We have cefotaxime. So first we'll discuss the 5 parenteral preparation, that is cefotaxime, ceftriaxone, ceftriaxone, and ceftazidime, and cefoperazone. So these are the 5 third generation cephalosporin. Cefotaxime, it has a very potent action against gram-negative as well as gram-positive organisms, and the use of the cefotaxime is for treating even meningitis, because this third generation cephalosporin, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. Increased levels are seen in the CSF. So it is meningitis caused by the gram-negative bacilli. It takes care of it, and it is also useful against certain resistant or certain hospital-acquired infections, so nosocomial infections. It is used to treat certain septicemias, infections in the immunocompromised patients, and typhoid fever. We are using ceftriaxone. Also, cefotaxime is also useful. Again, penicillin is producing Neisseria gonorrhea, the urethritis. So these are all taken care of by the cefotaxime. Now, kinetics of the cefotaxime, if you see, it has a t-half of 1 hour, but because it has an active metabolite, it has a longer duration of action because of the metabolite. So 12-hourly dosing is there for the cefotaxime. Then the second parenteral third generation cephalosporin is ceftriaxone, which has a similar antibacterial spectrum like cefotaxime, but it has a property of inhibiting the anaerobes and especially the Bacteroid fragilis. So this is taken care of by ceftriaxone, and it has, the indications are also similar like the cefotaxime. Then coming to ceftriaxone, this is one of the very important third generation cephalosporin, which is given as a parenteral injection, intramuscular as well as the IV injection. And the most distinguishing feature about the ceftriaxone is it has the longest acting cephalosporin. Remember it, that it has a t-half of 8 hours, and once or twice daily dosing is enough. It has a very good CSF penetration. So because of that, it is very much preferred for treating the meningitis. And it is also a drug which is eliminated in the bile. So therefore, many of the abdominal infections and cholecystitis, abdominal sepsis, septicemias, all these, we are using the ceftriaxone. So you can see that it is the uses of ceftriaxone is in many serious infections like the bacterial meningitis, the multi-drug resistant typhoid fever, complicated urinary tract infections, the abdominal sepsis, certain septicemias. Penicillin is producing Neisseria gonorrhea. Single dose is enough. And in the treatment of syphilis also, early syphilis, you give a 7 days treatment, and in the late syphilis, you give a 15 days treatment. Also, ceftriaxone, to overcome the resistance, they can be combined with other beta-lactamase inhibitors. We have seen tazobactam, sulbactam, which were combined with semi-synthetic penicillins, isn't it? So, like with penicillin, these beta-lactamase inhibitors, they can be combined with cephalosporins also. And in this way, you can overcome certain resistant organisms. And the adverse effect of the ceftriaxone is hypothrombinemia and bleeding tendencies. So the reports of hemolysis is also been seen. And in meningitis, it is given as a 4-gram dose followed by 2 gram IV. And this treatment is given for a period of 10 days. Then coming to the remaining 2 third-generation cephalosporins, besides this cefotaxime and ceftazidime, cefotaxime and ceftriaxone, we come to the third-generation cephalosporin. That is, besides cefotaxime, ceftriaxone, and ceftriaxone, we come to ceftazidime and cefoperazone. Now, ceftazidime and cefoperazone, these are the remaining parenteral preparations of the third-generation cephalosporin, which are very, very effective against the gram-negative organism, and these are also effective, highly effective against the Pseudomonas. So they are known as the anti-pseudomonal cephalosporins, and they are effective against many gram-negative Enterobacteriaceae. And so both these drugs are having a very strong activity against the Pseudomonas, and also they are effective against anaerobes like the Bacteroides fragilis. They are indicated in febrile neutropenic patients with hematological malignancies, in cases of burns, in cases of resistant typhoid, and in severe urinary biliary. In biliary and respiratory skin and soft tissue infections, we are using the cefoperazone because this is again excreted in the bile. So it would be used in the biliary infections. So, and adverse effects of cefoperazone, it has a disulfiram-like reaction with the alcohol. Then coming to the remaining third-generation cephalosporin, that is the oral preparation. That is cefixime, cefpodoxime, proxetil. These are the oral preparations of the third-generation cephalosporin, which are highly active against Enterobacteriaceae, H. influenzae, Streptococcus pyogenes. Remember, H. influenzae, Streptococcus pyogenes, Streptococcus pneumoniae, these are all causing the resistant, this community-acquired pneumonia. So all these are taken care of by this prevention. They are resistant to the beta-lactamases. All the resistant organisms are taken care of. Also, they are highly active against the Enterobacteriaceae, Streptococci, and Staphylococcus aureus. Then coming to the cefdinir and ceftibuten, which are also having good activity against the beta-lactamase producing organisms, and they are active against gram-positive and few gram-negative organisms. And also they are stable to the beta-lactamases. So because they are stable to the beta-lactamases, so resistant organisms are very well taken care of. They are very useful for acute exacerbation of chronic bronchitis and ENT infections, as well as certain respiratory and skin infections. Then ceftamate pipoxal, this is the last but not the least. This is also a ester prodrug, and it is having a high activity against the gram-negative Enterobacteriaceae as well as the Neisseria gonorrhea. And these are indicated in the respiratory and skin and soft tissue infections. Now we come to the last part of this. We just summarize. So cephalosporins, you see the first generation, you see the activity against these organisms. They are more effective against the Staphylococcus aureus. Cefazolin is very effective against Staphylococcus aureus as well as certain anaerobes. And the second generation cephalosporin, you can see cefuroxime as well as cefuroxime axetil. Both these drugs are very effective against H. influenzae. And cefoxitin, I mentioned about cefoxitin. This is a unique drug in the sense it is not available in India and it is available in the US. This is effective against anaerobes, you can see. But to complete the list, we must know that it is effective against the anaerobes. For anaerobes, we are having very less drug among the first and second generation. So cefoxitin is very effective against anaerobes and also the Bacteroides fragilis. And this cefoxitin is a cefamycin. You know, cephalosporins, structurally it is related to cephalosporin, but it is a cefamycin because it is obtained from actinomycetes. It is effective against anaerobes and it is a second generation parenteral drug other than cefoxitin, there was another drug, cefotetan. This is also not available in India. So in bacterial sensitivity about the cephalosporin, we have seen about the first and second generation. Now let us see the third generation cephalosporin. You can see the ceftriaxone. Ceftriaxone is very effective against H. influenzae, Enterobacteriaceae, and these drugs, ceftazidime and cefoperazone, they are more effective against Pseudomonas aeruginosa. If you see the first and second generation, they have no activity against the Pseudomonas, but the third generation have a very good activity, ceftazidime and cefoperazone against the Pseudomonas aeruginosa. And ceftriaxone, you can see it has an effect on the Bacteria fragilis. And ceftriaxone is having an effect on almost all the organisms. That is, the staph is also taken care of, H. influenzae, Enterobacteriaceae, as well as the Pseudomonas, as well as the Bacteria fragilis. And this is also one of the long-acting preparation. Then you see the among the oral preparation, you can see the cefpodoxime proxetil. This drug is very, very effective against Staphylococcus aureus, as well as H. influenzae, as well as Enterobacteriaceae. Although this is an oral preparation, you can see it is also taking care of the Pseudomonas as well as the Bacteria fragilis. So cefpodoxime proxetil is having a very good activity against most of the organisms. And let us summarize the pharmacokinetics of the first generation. You can see the protein binding of the cefazolin is very high, and it is a longer acting. It is used for surgical prophylaxis. Some amount of these drugs is disposed in the renal. Some amount is also excreted in the bile. Cephalexin is also in the bile, it is excreted. Second generation, if you see the pharmacokinetics among the CSF penetration, cefuroxime is the only second generation cephalosporin which has a CSF penetration. But cefuroxime axetil also I have not mentioned here, but that also has a good CSF penetration. But both these drugs, they are not used for meningitis because we have better third generation drugs like ceftriaxone, ceftazidime, which can be used for the meningitis. Then most of the drugs, they are having the renal excretion, as you can see here. And if you see the plasma half-life of the earlier first and second generation drug, that is very less, about 1 or 2 hours. But you see the ceftriaxone here, 8.5 hours. So this one is the longest acting third generation cephalosporin. As well as if you see the CSF penetration, cefotaxime is having a very good CSF penetration, as well as ceftriaxone also has a good CSF penetration. So therefore they are using meningitis. As well as you see the protein binding of ceftriaxone, that is the highest, as well as also cefoperazone, that is also highest. And because of that, they have a longer duration of action. And this ceftriaxone having the longest acting drug, and it is having both disposal is by the hepatic as well as renal. Both these drugs, ceftriaxone and cefoperazone, they are excreted in the bile, therefore they are used in many in urinary biliary infections. They are preferred. And cefixime is also some amount is also disposed in the bile. So with this, we have summarized the first, second, and the third generation cephalosporin. So you please read it. And in the next class, I will discuss about the fourth generation cephalosporin, fifth generation cephalosporin, and we'll complete the beta-lactam antibiotics by having a discussion on monobactams and carbapenems. Okay, thank you.